Welcome back to the Fixed Ops Roundtable. We'd like to talk to you now about the kiosk movement, meeting new service expectations. And to do that, we'd like to introduce the roundtable to Ross McArthur, who is the Area Vice President for GoMoto. Ross, welcome to the Fixed Ops Roundtable.
Thanks so much, Ted. I appreciate it. You guys have been kicking out some great content, so it's a pretty big honor to be a part of this and hopefully answer some good questions.
Well, we're grateful to have you. And, in the last 3 years, this is probably the first conversation that we have really had, surrounding this type of new technology and service drives. So I want to kind of, go back a little bit. We're all consumers, when we're not, working in the dealership. And in our own lives, we've all become familiar with seeing self-service kiosks, whether it's at the local convenience store or whether we're, buying some fast food. As consumers become familiar with these, have they become more receptive to using them inside the service department?
I mean, absolutely, right? The more somebody sees something, the more used to it they get. They can relate to it more. So yeah, and it's really that movement that you're talking about. It's really been driven by consumers at the end of the day. So technology is prevalent everywhere, right? Consumers not only want it, technology that is, they expect it, which is a very big difference than it was even 5, 6, 7 years ago. And I think in 2022, everyone wants not only technology, but they want to use that technology to create speed and control and things like that. And so it's really changed so rapidly. And as you mentioned, not only is technology prevalent everywhere, so are these kiosks. And not just in obviously automotive, actually, they're more prevalent everywhere else. And I was having a conversation with my wife yesterday, and I was preparing for this and, spitballing some ideas and some topics. And I said, gosh, when do you remember the first kiosk? And it had to be airlines, right? I mean, would you agree airlines were probably the first? Yeah, that
Airlines
was
were an early adopter, Ross, right? I remember getting used to them, and now, I mean, would you expect not to use a kiosk when you check in for an airline? It's expected, right?
Yeah, there's 50 of them, right? They're all up there. So yeah, we're very used to that. And then you fast forward not only from airlines, now you're looking. You mentioned restaurants and fast food chains, hospitals. I saw one at a dentist recently, which is kind of new. So really, any major industry where you're dealing with consumers, there's transactions, you're starting to see this technology. So last week, I was like, all right, I'm gonna in preparation, I'm gonna start thinking about this. I'm gonna look at everywhere I go and count the kiosks because you almost don't pay attention to it. So here's what I got. I got LabCorp, which is for blood work. Checked in on a kiosk, right? So that was kind of different. Didn't even think about it. Wawa gas stations, which you're in.
Yes.
I think you're up north right now, and those are pretty prevalent. We have them down here in the south. So that they do it for their food orders. And most recently, we went to the movies in movie theaters. Like the local movie theater has it. Again, never really realized it. So pretty crazy. And what's the other thing that's starting to happen too, which is interesting, is there's just a ton of data showing why these industries are using them. So one survey, which was interesting, it shows that 85% of consumers prefer to use it. And there's a lot of reasons why, right? We're all different why. So that's kind of interesting. But the other thing is that time, that process time to check in at LabCorp or to get my movie tickets, the time part, we're saving 40% when we use a kiosk in general. So no wonder, right? No wonder these industries are starting to use it. But you'll appreciate it. The second part of this is don't let these industries fool you that it's all about consumer experience, right? That's part of it, right? That definitely is. But there's a lot of other reasons why they're using it, and it's a financial gain, right? There's a financial ROI there. So here's a good one: McDonald's. There was a case study recently that their kiosk consumers, so self-ordering consumers, purchase 30% more. So the average check is 30% more.
Wow.
So that's significant. Your McDonald's, you have thousands of locations. So that equated to a 6% increase in overall sales. So across the board, which is huge. When you're a huge mega corporation like that, 6% growth in the economy that we've been in the last couple of years is big. So here's another funny one though. So Chili's has those little table side ones, right? That they come out and they set at your table. So they saw a 20% increase in dessert sales. Who would have thought, right? But these are the type of things that these industries are starting to see, and I think automotive is right on the cusp of starting to see some of those same benefits.
I know that our audience right now, the Tully Williams and Ed Roberts, you got everybody's attention because we all like that little extra bit of the order, whether it's the dessert as well as the saving time component. Ross, talk to me a little bit about some of the capabilities that are drawing consumers to the kiosks. I mean, you've mentioned a couple already.
Yeah, yeah. So kind of there's a few big themes, and again, I mentioned a few earlier, but I think one is the control, right? The control of the process and how the consumer is being communicated with. If we're being honest, a lot of people don't like human interaction in 2022. I know that sounds
Right.
weird. We're doing a show right now and doing a Q&A session, but there's a whole lot of people that prefer not to talk to somebody. So I think what's interesting, it allows people to communicate with the dealership. And if we're being honest, a lot of people, that's a painful visit to begin with. It just is. I mean, let's just be honest. So it allows them to communicate with the store on their terms. So I think that's really important. The other thing is it allows them when they use a kiosk to get all the information that they would get from an advisor, right? So we know that we're going to get recall information. We're going to get basic information around, safety, potential upsells, things like that. But it doesn't feel salesy because they're going through the process themselves. So, and we'll get into how that dynamic works with the advisor here in a little bit, I think, too. So, and the other thing is it empowers consumers. Like we're all busy, right? So people, the average kids are in, 3 to 4 activities a week. We're super busy now more than ever. Well, there's an outdoor version. This allows them to drop off keys 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They can even do a mobile check-in and use key lockers to check out and pay virtually. So, I mean, there's so many benefits. And to be honest with you, we talked about one offline earlier, but speed, right? Speed from a consumer standpoint. We talked about that 40% reduction a few minutes ago. Like, hey, if I can get in and out, that's a huge benefit, but it's also benefit to the dealership. So those are big ones. I mean, but the list goes on and on and on.
And a service manager recently said to me, Ross, that one of the things they like is the consistency that no matter what, everything is going to be offered to the consumer, whether the advisor's having a good day or it's late in the afternoon or whether it's during lunchtime, the kiosk will make sure that every time every guest is going to see all their options. Go back a couple years, because I remember when I first started hearing about the kiosks on the service drive, a lot of folks said, oh my gosh, we're going to be replacing our service advisors with a kiosk. And a lot of people initially thought that. I would say, I don't think that's out there at all today. But talk to us about the dynamic between a service advisor and the kiosk and what that looks like.
So it's funny that you said that because you're right. I mean, when we go back 3 to 5 years, I think any kiosk system out there, that was a conversation, automotive or other, right? It's going to replace people. It's going to replace people. And what we find is it really doesn't. If done correctly, there's a great dynamic between utilizing the kiosk and utilizing your advisors, right? And they can work together. So what the kiosk ultimately does is it gets them started in the process immediately, gathers basic information. Like I mentioned a second ago, pitches basic upsells, windshield wiper blades, things like that. But what the unique thing, if done correctly, is this actually allows the advisors to dedicate more time towards high dollar ROs, right? The things that are incredibly profitable for the store, along with talking to that customer about, declined services from last time or things that they may have questions on. So it does the things that, let's just be honest, they're not really getting paid that wage to do. They're getting paid to do those other things that we just talked about. So again, I think if dealers are looking at it that way, it creates so much efficiencies for the store and kind of frees up that non-selling time that the advisor's getting sucked into.
We're talking today to Ross McArthur, who is the area vice president of GoMoto. GoMoto is a kiosk solution that is in dealerships right now. Our audience will be very familiar with GoMoto. Ross, talk to us a little bit. Let's say a dealership that's here today is interested in bringing maybe one or two of the kiosks in to, let's say, help with that, wait time, to decrease that for the consumer. How difficult would that initially be? And are we talking a lot of demands on infrastructure and so on?
I always joke you need two things: power and internet, right? I oversimplify that slightly, but in general, you need power and internet. Those are the two things you need. If there's an outdoor unit or what we call the 365 units that are, can be in some weather and things like that. There's some installation, some bolt-ons to the ground and things like that for security purposes. But once the kiosk is set up on site, it's a normal setup software process, right? So the install process is that. The second part is then we just customize the menus and upsell options for the dealership, and it integrates right back into the DMS. Like, how much easier can you get? So that's what's nice is it sounds like it's going to be complicated, but when this is what you do, it's relatively simple and painless.
And I would imagine that over time, consumers are going to grow to expect the dealership to have this type of solution. And if they've seen it or experienced it elsewhere, Ross, that this is something they're going to want and demand, just as they would in their personal lives elsewhere.
100%. Couldn't agree more.
Okay, we have a very creative audience who thinks out of the box. So, last question for you today, Ross. What are some creative ways that you have seen dealerships use these kiosks, to interact with their consumers?
Well, I'm probably going to talk about a few people that are on the listening to this, if I'm being honest with you. So, there's a lot of creative ways, if I'm being, fully transparent, and they're happening daily, and so it's kind of unique. So, probably by the time we talk again, and early next year or whatever, there's going to be 3 or 4 more examples I could give you. But one is big businesses like hospitals where they're working 12, 14-hour shifts, things like that. Colleges where students, are kind of on campus and they don't generally get off campus as much. We're actually placing these units there, and there's partnerships created with them, and there's incentives given, and they'll go in and they'll work with those nurses, bring their car to the dealership, then return the car back while they're working. And when they're done with work, they have their car fully serviced and can head home. I mean, how much better does it get when we talk about time and freedom and all those different things? I mean, that's a game changer, and we have numerous dealerships that are doing that today. So that's one good example. Another one is it's one that we don't nearly talk enough about, but here in Florida, Texas, there's a lot of Spanish speaking customers and consumers out there, right? And so the kiosk actually has a Spanish mode that can be selected, and the whole process then translates to Spanish. Again, it's those little small things that make that customer experience so much better. And then really the third is dealerships are really adopting that remote payments, which we've been a little
Yes.
bit late to the game on that, but approvals after hours, payments after hours, all that can all be done through the system. So there's a lot of unique things, and again, like I joked about, there's probably going to be 3 or 4 more that coming up.
You're hitting a couple nails on the head that we're talking about at this event. That last one, the consumer remembers that last transaction, the payment, probably the most, okay, in their interaction with the dealership. And that affects the customer satisfaction. And to go back to your talk about the time and work-life balance at the dealership, there's been a lot of talk here at the roundtable now about dealerships. We had a panel going to a 4-day work week for their employees. All right, not for the consumer, but for the employee. In order to give it a better culture. So tools like GoMoto, only help. And also gives the customer a more modern experience as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many win-wins when we just look at this short session that we could have dove into and talked about. But yeah, I mean, consumers are expecting it. We're trying to make it easier on our employees and as well. And so this hits a lot of those points. So no, really good point.
Ross, I'm going to ask you if a fixed ops director, general manager, service director, dealer watching today wants to get more information on what GoMoto can do for them and what solutions you've got. What's the best way for our audience to reach out to you, Ross?
Yeah, I mean, a few ways. So, me personally, you can always find me on LinkedIn and other social media sites. Feel free. I'm not super active on posting, but I'm super active as far as communication goes. So, feel free to reach out to me there. As far as GoMoto itself, I mean, any major social media site, GoMoto has a presence, but the biggest one is just GoMoto.com. Let's not reinvent the wheel, but feel free to hop on there if you want a demo. You can select a virtual demo, or you can have somebody in store. We're really catered to our audience and however they want to learn best. But, again, I appreciate the plug here at the end, of course, but more than anything, I just appreciate talking with like-minded people.
And I think our audience very much appreciates the technology that you bring to the table for their dealerships, because our audience are the early adopters. And you know what? You've got some great technology. So, on behalf of the Fixed Ops community, Russ, I want to thank you and GoMoto for being with us here today.
Absolutely. Thank you to you, of course, Ted, and then thanks to the audience for listening. Looking forward to talking more.
Everybody, Ross McArthur from GoMoto here today at the Fixed Ops Roundtable.